Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuel. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, we're now really just days away from the NATO Vilnius summit and all the excitement that has been attached. One side note is that there'd been a lot of speculation that they're going to, if they can't directly bring Ukraine into NATO, but what they'll do is say that none of the conditions that we normally impose on NATO aspirant members, Ukraine has to follow. And then President Biden said the other day, no, they're going to be no easy path to NATO. They're going to have to follow the same track as everybody else, which was very strange because even Finland and Sweden didn't have to follow that track. So no one is taking this very seriously. It sounds like Biden was just off script, saying, hey, oh, no one gets any special privileges when I'm around. So, but anyway, so we're expecting this, and then Stoltenberg. He is going around, he was in Washington, he was in Brussels, and he's doing his shtick with saying, well, that Putin is engaging in reckless, dangerous nuclear talk. But what conclusions does he draw from that? Well, that we will continue exactly as before. We'll continue to provoke Russia. We'll continue to pour arms into Ukraine. Nothing's going to stop us. No one's going to say no to Ukraine's NATO aspirations. And in the meantime, we haven't seen any indications that Russia has changed its nuclear posture. But what about the fact that Russia has is now locating tactical nuclear missiles in Belarus? It's not participating in the New START treaty. It's modernizing its strategic nuclear forces. It's put them on alert. No, nothing to worry about. So everything is in shape as we head into the Vilnius summit. So what's your take as we move towards Vilnius?
Two words: chaos and panic. That's what I see going on right now. Stoltenberg has said it. This is recently just put out on RT. Is that we don't want a frozen conflict. No. We want a just peace. Okay, whatever that means to you. Means, yeah. Okay, yeah. All right. As far as the acceptability and admission of Ukraine, again, that's kind of like it's not an omelet; it's scrambled eggs. Okay, it's like you can, I don't know what word salad I'm supposed to believe from whom. Right. I'm glad you point out Finland and Sweden. There's no checklist for them, is there?
No, they just boom. Right this way, sir.
I know there's kind of there's a racist element to that somehow to me. I'm sorry, okay? And plus, obviously everyone, I mean, the fact that Finland and Sweden are going to be part of NATO, or as Sweden already is, I think they'd already been client states of NATO for decades, okay? So, I mean, that's why George and we didn't wet our pants on this one, okay? Because what we find bewildering is that you had a security agreement with the Soviet Union, then the Russian Federation that was kind of working pretty well for you, okay? Right. And then you change. I mean, that's what George and I found to be mystifying, okay? But also, there's another thing that Russia's the way it looks at the expansion of the alliance, particularly of the Nordic states, is that they don't have huge NATO infrastructure. Ukraine has huge NATO infrastructure. Okay, so it's not that what Putin wanted less NATO, but now it's getting more NATO. Well, that's clever. That's nice. That's somebody that at a podium says, but doesn't mean anything. Okay, not yet anyway. Okay, could mean something at one point.
That's where I was saying that it's a matter of not yet. And so while Russia didn't say much on the on Finland and Sweden, that's an issue that could well arise at a later stage. I mean, you can't do everything all at once. But that's an issue. I mean, it's that's all everything that is as we move towards the Arctic.
Everything's moving to the Arctic. Yeah, exactly.
That's a lot of strategic real estate there, particularly now with the polar melting and everything else. I mean, that's going to be a very important strategically, and that's going to let in Americans and everything else. So I think that Russia may well get round to addressing that particular issue.
And they already are. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but Russia outdoes I think all comers when when it comes to icebreakers. I mean, Russia has more than everybody else combined. Everybody else combined. So they are definitely thinking about it, and their icebreakers are pretty good, okay? Right. Because there was it a few years ago or less than that, there was a Canadian icebreaker that got stuck in the ice and they had to go get it, okay? Well, or at least one of those countries anyway. So, and as far as this, I don't know, George. I mean, I think that the alliance doesn't really know what to do at this point. I think NATO is in a quandary right now because, you know, and you and I, keen observers of it, as well as a few others. I mean, I can't hang on to anything that any one of these people are saying. It doesn't make any sense to me. There's not much depth to it. It's a soundbite. It's a quick talking point. It's hard to figure out. One thing is for sure is that you know, crossing the Rubicon of giving the NATO membership to Ukraine now, that's declaring World War III, and I think they're beginning to get that.
That's right. But of course, there are those within NATO who would like World War III, and I mean, we've got obviously Poland and the Baltic states, and now you've got this
ones that would go first.
Yes, that's right. We have Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who gets paid to be a consultant to the Ukraine government. So yet again, another carpetbagger drawing funds out of Ukraine. So he's proposed the coalition of the willing. So anyone who wants to go in should just simply go in to Ukraine. And of course, Poland, already has mercenaries fighting there, but that could, Poland could move in other ways. There's also a question of, if these F-16s, if Ukraine does get these F-16s, there's a lot of talk that they will actually be based on Polish runways. So they're going to take off and land on Polish runways, in which case they become legitimate targets. So that's another way in which somehow you go, oh, Article 5, one for all for one, and so on. So it is a problem, and as you say, for the whatever you call the NATO doves, I think they do realize that if you get Ukraine into NATO, then that means it's World War III. But then, they don't know what to say to the argument of Zelensky, who says, hey, I need your help now. I'm fighting Russia now. I'm doing the heavy lifting for you. You've said Russia is your enemy. I'm doing all the fighting. Come and join me. And they don't really know what to say to that argument.
When it comes to NATO and all of its flunkies around it, Rasmussen, all these people, all the flunkies, and throw in their ally or wannabe ally, Ukraine, Zelensky is the only one with impeccable logic on this one.
Exactly.
Okay?
Yes, absolutely. He has the logic. He says, hey, you want to fight with Russia? Hey, I'm doing it. I'm doing it for you. I mean, where are you? I mean, you're just simply saying, I'll hold your jacket for you.
No, I'm sorry. I was going to say, it's inviting him to the table and sticking the bill with him. Okay. Which actually quite literally is happening when it comes to Ukrainian line. They're footing the bill. Okay.
Right. Yeah, they are indeed.
You invited me to the table. I mean, gotta help me out, guys. Little change.
That's right. So
cover the tip.
No, that's right. So what we get is that we'll have the Vilnius summit, and then you'll have the group photograph. All of the the 31 NATO members. I'm sure they'll get Sweden in there as well. The class photo with Zelensky always front and center, and everyone around it, because obviously, hey, Zelensky is doing for NATO what NATO isn't willing to do for itself. And then they go home. Now, of course, if they had any agency, if they had any decency, they would have said, there's something immoral about this. We can't go. We're not doing anything. They're getting killed, destroyed, slaughtered. We need to bring this to an end, for everybody's sake. But none of them have that, decency to say that.
Well, that brings up a really important point, and it's a thread that you and I have been tugging along for a long time, and it for me it could be some kind of policy trick or a off ramp. Putin always needs an off ramp. Nobody in the West ever needs an off ramp.
Right.
You notice that? It's
Yeah.
always one side needs an off ramp. But anyway,
Yeah.
this, Stoltenberg, we need a just peace, and that just peace will be determined by Zelensky.
Right.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it? I mean, basically, they're going to leave him holding the bag.
Right.
Okay. We're done at this point. Okay.
Right.
Get the best deal you can, but we got your back. Don't worry, we got your back.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Not one more square meter you'll lose.
Right.
We promise you that. If I was Zelensky, I would say, you know what I'd say. Okay.
No, I think so. But this is the thing that, of course,
but I don't think Russia would even buy that.
No, but I think that's the thing. I mean, I think that NATO has now got itself so deep into this that they can't now turn around and say, why don't you just accept this deal? You've lost some territory, you lost Crimea, just make do with what you've got.
Look on the brighter side.
That's right. But now and NATO is all in. I mean, they basically have stipulated they want total defeat for Russia. Then they turn around and say, well, it's up to Zelensky to decide. So again, this is typical of NATO's deceitfulness. On one hand, they present all these grand aspirations, which they tell Zelensky and tell Ukrainians and tell the world, and then they say, "Oh well, hey, it's up to Zelensky to decide what terms he's going to accept." Just like, well, we don't organize the counteroffensive, even though Newland said they did. It's up to the Ukrainians to organize their counteroffensive.
We have no responsibility for what happened, none whatsoever. Even though, as Scott Ritter pointed out to George and I, is that it was last summer that the Ukrainian military was essentially defeated by Russia, and now they're fighting NATO with Ukrainian troops, yes, but they're fighting. But the military they're fighting is NATO, what they was able to cobble together. Okay, right. And so, but I'm going to keep a close eye on this. It's up to him. But that is a great way. Like, I got to grab my coat, a taxi. Right. I got to really go.
I think that's the way of doing it. They're saying, because then they can maintain the fiction, which is that NATO is not a party to the conflict. So, but of course, they talk with the 10-point peace plan. Now, the 10-point peace plan, whoa, there's only one peace plan on the table. The Zelensky's 10-point peace plan. Well, the 10-point peace plan is defeat for Russia. So that's NATO's position. So NATO is going to go on fighting to the last Ukrainian to defeat Russia. Well, that's a tall order, because how are you going to do that? How do you defeat a nuclear superpower? But that's essentially NATO's commitment. So they say, well, we're going to work towards defeating Russia. We're not a party to the conflict. We're not actually willing to shed our own lives for this conflict, but we're going to keep this going and reassure our public that there's nothing dangerous going on here, nothing to worry about. I mean, it's like NATO goes through these convoluted somersaults. And no one asks it any questions. That's because basically you got the journalists are all embedded with NATO, and NATO is a force for good.
Yeah, and what they're it's sending the wrong message. That's one of the things they're saying. We don't want to send the wrong message to China. And Stoltenberg said 2-3 days ago is that Russia must be defeated because of China. Okay, yes. So he shows his hand, he shows his cards, and Ukraine isn't in it. Okay,
right.
Yes. But it's reputational also for NATO, and that's something they have to worry about, because you have Moldova, possibly Armenia, Georgia. We want to join. We want to join.
Right. Yes.
And they say, "Oh well, let's get back to on that one."
Yes.
Okay.
Right. No, but that's what NATO does. I mean, what NATO does is it's finding reasons for its continued existence. And essentially, it's found the formula.
It has it. Yes.
Which is,
congratulations, NATO. You found
exactly. So they've mobilized Europe. Everyone is under NATO leadership, which means everyone's under American leadership. All that stuff about Britain and Brexit and everything, that's just everyone's forgotten about that. Who cares? Britain is apparently now one of the leaders of Europe through NATO, and they will continue along their merry way with expansion. I mean, there's no question Armenia and Azerbaijan are next. We know that they're heavily involved in Kazakhstan. I think they're also involved in Kyrgyzstan. That they have their formula, and it essentially becomes a self-perpetuating machine of continual mobilization without actually getting into a war. They don't actually want to get involved in a war. I mean, they're just basically continually expanding while avoiding the war. And that's why Stoltenberg went on a party to the conflict, and there's nothing to worry about. We've seen no change.
The question is, how long can you actually do that? Okay, that's
I don't think.
No, George is absolutely right, because I've always contended that NATO is a political, ideological organization. I mean, if it really were a military one, okay, yes, it can bomb Serbia because Serbia couldn't fight back. Okay, right. I don't call that really military. Okay, no. I call that just a slaughter. Okay, yeah. It didn't take. Do you think you needed logistical geniuses to pull that off? No. Okay, but Ukraine is a very different thing. Okay, and George is right. I mean, they look for weaknesses, they look for political weaknesses, they look for divisions within these developing countries here, and they take advantage of it. The best example is right now is Ukraine. Go with these neo-Nazi guys.
Right.
Okay, but when it comes to the military, well, NATO isn't much of a military threat. The United States is certainly.
Exactly. That's right. Well, that's it, and that's really the problem. I mean, United States, of course, that's how it exerts its power in the world. It's through NATO. Because hey, we're the leader of this massive alliance. Everybody is subordinate to us. We get to call the shots. But it also means that we're the ones who are at risk, because if there is a shooting war, there's only one power that can get involved in a shooting war. That's the United States. So they always need to avoid that. And that's why you have all these responsible statecraft types. Oh, President Biden, very, very wisely. Oh, he's avoided getting into a shooting war. That required a lot of wisdom to do. But what you've done is you've created chaos, disaster, total instability, but you've avoided getting into a shooting war.
But you've avoided losing Baltimore or Oklahoma City.
Right.
You lost Dusseldorf. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
But that's it, George.
No, it is. That is exactly. And everybody used to know that during the Cold War, because everybody used to know that if there is going to be a nuclear war, it's going to be limited to the European continent. The Americans are not going to allow their continent to be attacked. So they're going to limit it to the European continent, and at some point, then they'll call it a day and say, "Okay, well, we'll call for peace now." So that's always going to be.
And BlackRock will be more than happy to step in and pick up the pieces at the American taxpayer.
That's right. That's that's exactly right. And so it's a deeply immoral formula, but NATO has bought into it. And so, we talked about this again and again, and, why have the Europeans accepted an arrangement that is so detrimental to their interests, their economic interests, and their strategic interests? Because if there is indeed a shooting war, which could happen, they're going to get whacked. The United States will not get whacked.
You know why it's worth it, George? You know why it's worth it? Because Ben Wallace and Annalena Baerbock want to be the next Secretary General of NATO. I mean, those are their priorities. Not European security, but who can climb the ladder in this hierarchical order that is run by the United States and paid by the American taxpayer.
Yeah.
That's the caliber of people. They have no strategic thinking or vision.
Right.
I mean, Annalena Baerbock said Putin has to change his position 360. Okay. Tells you everything you know.
Yeah,
I mean, that's how dangerous and pathetic this situation is. I said, who's jockeying for position for the next promotion?
Yeah, no, that's right. And that's the thing. Whenever they try to make these arguments as to why they're fighting in Ukraine, they strikingly fail. They've never made the case why exactly are you in Ukraine? Ukraine is not a member of NATO, not a member of the EU. There's no military agreement that you have to fulfill. Yeah, let's say Ukraine loses, and how is that? Does that affect you? And so they have to invent all these things, and so well, if it's Ukraine today, and then it'll be somebody else tomorrow. Russians are going to keep marching and whatever. They haven't even the remotest,
Well,
piece of evidence to say, that Russia intends to march anywhere, off the Ukraine.
Yeah, but they even trip up on their very loose logic here. So we have, okay, on the one hand, we have to defeat Russia so they don't invade the Baltic republics. But in the same paragraph say, but Russia is shown itself to be woefully inadequate in its military operation. Keystone Tops or
no,
007? Tell me which one it is. Which one is it?
Not at all, not at all. And then particularly when they make the case that somehow no one is going to tell us as to who will be a member of NATO. We decide whether Ukraine will be a member of NATO. I thought that the issue was that Russia was this huge threat to Ukraine. So now the issue is who's going to be a member of NATO. It's kind of what the Russians were saying. We just don't like that this should be a member of NATO. So how does that get to the point where they're going to march onto Poland? So what's the logic there? And now, as you said, he brings up the issue of China. Well, if Putin succeeds here, then the China will. Why would China think about what is Taiwan? According to what's going on in Ukraine. I mean, who the hell thinks that way?
One thing is for sure: the Chinese. They think of NATO as like a bad cold. Just stay away from these people, right. Okay? Right. These people are erratic, yes. Okay, and extremely dangerous.
Yes.
And what they do is that NATO, it's antithetical to its mission. It does not project peace and prosperity. No, it just does exactly the opposite.
Right. Exactly. It's the exact opposite. Now, why would NATO be involved in Kazakhstan? I mean, it's a North Atlantic Treaty Organization. You go to Kazakhstan, they're opening a liaison office in Japan. Why are you doing all of this? And this is it. We say it doesn't convey stability. There was always an opportunity to create stability in 1991. I mean, there's ways of creating a security architecture that ensures everybody's security. Why didn't NATO follow that path?
You could even go back to December 17th, 2022. You could go, 2021. I mean, that was the last moment, the last chance to do it. This liaison office in Japan, it's very, very telling, because George and I did a video a few days ago about how if we could just get the Russians off the Security Council, okay? Get Russia off the Security Council and give a seat to an African country that doesn't have a veto, okay?
That's it.
Okay, but this is an extension of what George and I were saying, and I think we actually made a mention of it, is that this shows the contempt the West has for the United Nations, because if it can't control every single facet of it, it doesn't want it, okay? Right. So what they're doing, we're hearing an echo from John McCain's grave, this League of Democracies. And so NATO and the League of Democracies are one, okay? Right. And that is a replacement of the United Nations and its charter.
Yes. Yeah, no question, because this goes really back to what happened in 1945, because in 1945, all the heavy lifting in World War II had been accomplished by the Soviet Union. Britain and the United States did something. France did nothing. So when you created this United Nations, you had to give quite a bit to the Soviet Union. They didn't give very much, because they still had, in terms of the permanent members, the weight was in the favor of the West. But they gave the Security Council to the Soviet Union, and then they allowed I think Belarus and Ukraine also to be members of the United Nations,
Right.
just to make sure that the Soviet Union wasn't totally outnumbered by the West. So that was one thing. The West had to accommodate to that. They didn't want to, but the Soviet Union was the big victim. But ever since then, basically the West wanted to basically overturn that victory. I mean, in 1945, they didn't really want to accept the reality of it. And the United Nations is one of those realities that that's why they've been working to undercut the United Nations really ever since 1945.
But the narrative is just the opposite, is that Russia wants to overturn the outcome of the Second World War, of the Cold War. Well, no, Russia doesn't want to overturn anything. Russia just doesn't, will not just bow down and genuflect to a Western interpretation of both events. That's all, okay? I mean, George and I love history a lot. Look behind me, look behind George, okay? Most of it is, how do we understand the events that happen? How did they come about? And how should we understand them in retrospect? In the West, there is no history, okay? I mean, and this is, and the Chinese are, and don't do that to the Chinese. Whoa, don't do that to them, okay?
Right.
Because they know their history very, very well, and they know the Western interpretation of it, and that it creates an enormous amount of umbrage on their part, okay? We always hear about the rise of China. It's the return of China.
I agree. But if we then go back, let's say, to World War II. So you go World War II, Hitler basically makes a huge drive into the Soviet Union. Basically, he was going to crush it, dismember it. That's kind of what the Imperial Germany did at Brest-Litovsk. Dismember it.
NATO's trying to do now.
Exactly. And, basically, after 1945, you couldn't do it anymore first of all, because of Soviet Union's great victory, and most important, within 4 years, at the end, the Soviet Union also had the atom bomb. Because if it hadn't had the atom bomb, they would have tried to dismantle it there then. I mean, there's no question the United States would have used its nuclear advantage to do that. But what happens in 1991? That formula, which is let's push Russians out, it goes into effect. It's like, you had this interregnum while you had the Soviet Union basically with its buffer states, its communist allies, its military alliance, which mirrored the West military alliance. You couldn't do anything. Once all that disappeared, lo and behold, the drive to the east,
reactivate the plan. Reactivate.
That's right. Drang nach Osten. We're doing the same thing. I mean, and you say, well, why are the Russians so paranoid? Yeah, because they see you keep doing the same thing. Instead of saying 1991, okay, now we're going to turn a new leaf. We're going to create a security system that takes care of everyone's interests. You're doing the same. You're just pushing your kind of your military alliance, further and further east and trying to encircle Russia. I mean, yeah, that's why the Russians get paranoid.
And what we see now is that, on my program, I'm kind of constantly asking the question is that how has the world changed as a result? Well, one of the most important things is that Russia has very little interest in Western-controlled institutions. It tried for 30 years to integrate. It really did, okay? But that's over right now. We talk about de-dollarization, new financial mechanisms for trade around the world. They're all on steroids right now, because what NATO has done is alien. And again, NATO is, when you look back at history, these are the colonial powers, okay?
Yep.
And Russia is a bit on the short end of the stick of those colonial powers, okay? Okay.
Right.
I mean, you remember there were American troops fighting in the early 20s in what was the Soviet Union. See, that's never talked about. There's no Netflix series on that, okay? But Russians know that. Oh yeah, you were on our soil. You invaded us. You too, Americans invaded us.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. All that is forgotten. The Allied intervention during World War I and continued continued for years after the end of World War One, and then of course there was the Japanese invasion of the Soviet Union. Also, none of this is ever really mentioned. I mean, it's like, you know, they talk. Everyone, people have to accept Hitler, but all these other invasions, you know, from the Western powers, and you know, essentially this is what the Russians say. Hey, this is where our problems lie. Our problems lie always with the West. And you say, well, what about China? What about China? We don't have a problem with China. I mean, maybe in 1,000 years' time or 500 years' time, we'll have a problem with China. We don't have a problem with China. We don't sit there worrying, I wonder if the Chinese are going to invade and grab a piece of territory. It's not something that's on. You know, but you know, this is kind of the West. Oh yeah, Russians are really more worried about the Chinese. No one in Russia is sitting there worrying that the Chinese are going to launch an attack. They are worrying about what NATO's up to.
Well, and that's part of the whole NATO mantra is that, you know, you're choosing the wrong side, okay? Right. Well, I don't know. The Chinese are not saying there's no dispute. Russia and China have no border disputes.
Right.
Zero.
Yeah.
Zero. They resolved them all. It was one of the first things. But also, in Central Asia, the Stans, the only thing that Yeltsin did in his foreign policy that was right is he talked to the Chinese and said, look, we don't need to be competitors there. We can work together. That is essentially take those pieces off the chessboard. We don't need to get in each other's grill about that. Right. Okay. Right. I mean, right. But I heard this in the early 2000s, Russia, we've talked about the junior partner and all of that. Yeah. And I've always responded and said, you know, there's a normalcy and a stability to Russia-Chinese relations where there are none with the West whatsoever, because the West keeps changing the rules.
Yeah, exactly. It changes the rules, and it doesn't stick to any agreements. I mean, you go the points now. I always say, you don't, but I say, you know, Russia is often just very naive and, you know, accepts agreements with the West that, you know, end up working to the detriment of Russia. But you know, and I think, you know, I think Putin said this when he was talking.
Can you repeat it? Because I think either I froze up or you froze up. So
I think we're both are frozen up. No, what I was saying is that I think Russia, I think often is, let's say, naive in its dealings with the West, and then turns around and say, well, the West, you know, lied to us. You know, that goes back, you know, the not 1 inch to the east, you know, the agreement with Yanukovych, you know, that there would be elections and so on, and you know, then Minsk, the Black Sea grain deal, and now, you know, Putin was talking when he was discussing with the African leaders the other day. You know, we had an agreement with Kiev on essentially would be a neutral, demilitarized Ukraine, and then lo and behold, the West turned around and you know, and he said, we even did this did a unilateral gesture of goodwill. We withdrew our forces from Kiev, and then you know, and then, well, you know, what did they do? They created the story of the Bucha, you know, the Bucha massacre. So how can you deal with people like that? How can you sign any kind of agreement? I mean, you know, if we were now talking about, you know, peace talks, peace negotiations, why would anyone believe that anything that the West signs on to, you know, Sergeant Schultz and Macron and Biden, they sign this agreement? Does anyone really believe that they're going to hold on to this agreement for more than 24 hours?
Well, that was the dilemma I had last Thursday on my program. 3 people, great people, good people of good faith, and strong believers in peace. And you know, and I know one of them very well. And I said, I want to believe this is possible, but I said, how? I mean, if one side completely lies and is deceitful every step of the way, they tear up agreements where the ink hasn't even dried yet. Right, I mean, that's quite literally what happened.
That was literally in the case of the Yanukovych deal. The ink was not dry. Yeah.
And I'm agreeing with, George and I have gone back and forth about, I mean, I think the grain deal is the most recent one. It's a good one. I mean, and you said, and I think this is like 3 months ago, I said, why are we doing this? Why? This is ridiculous. Okay.
Yeah.
My argument was they're going to give it one more try and then they'll let it go. So we're both right. Okay. Because that's what's happened right now.
Yeah.
But that my whole point is that, it's almost kind of liberating, is that I'm not trying to find a way back to anything, because that's a line that, we've crossed the Rubicon, and there's so much more going on in the world, as I remember I had a guest on from India. It was during one of the G7 things, and I asked her, I knew what the answer would be. I said, so what do you think of the results of the G7? And she said, who cares? And I think, I think that's kind of the attitude. We're going to just kind of have to move on. These people, they're like a seething sore that that will never. It's like a scab, and it's infecting everybody around us, and people are going to say enough is enough. We're going to have to move on, okay? And I think that's very healthy, okay, very healthy, because the West is very messianic. It has its own cult of neoliberalism that is built in with circular arguments, and of course, they're the garden, is Burrell would say. I mean, you can't talk, you can't reason with stupid. Sorry.
Right. No, that's right. But your analogy is perfect. You said it's a seething scab, a sore point, an infection. And that's really the problem, that it is an infection. And when you have an infection, it's actually very hard to deal with it. I mean, you can, you use antiviral medication, antibacterial medication, but sometimes it isn't effective. And that's what really we have with the West, because they aren't just going to accept
Nope.
the sort of, let's put it, the multipolar world. I mean, we can talk all the glories of multipolarity. The West isn't just going to accept this. They said, no, we are the masters. So they are going to try to find all sorts of ways.
Apropos, George, apropos, all the new aspirants for the BRICS organization, watch everyone, you heard it here first. Every single aspirant, they're going to be targeted, Swiss system, sanctions, secondary sanctions, no matter if it's a friend or foe. Because they will not let an organization like BRICS be an alternative to the West. Okay, so Iran is already heavily sanctioned. Turkey is interested. Look what they're going to do there. Okay, other countries through the Saudi Arabia. Because this is unconscionable, because they cannot see there's history is linear and it has one message, the West, the message of neoliberalism from the West, and they can't accept differently. That's the problem.
That's absolutely right. And as you said, it's ideological and messianic. That's not anything that anyone can just drop, overnight. And that's why all these things with the responsible statecraft and all these websites somehow imagine the West can just abandon its ideological messianic view of the world just overnight. Oh, they'll sign this or they'll agree to that. They'll lift sanctions on Russia. They are never going to lift sanctions on Russia. It's not going to happen.
Never.
Anymore.
No, it's like, you have the Visigoths, they invade Rome, they sack it, but the Senate is still sitting and making decisions about the empire as the streets burn around them. That's a good analogy.
Exactly, and that they're going to continue with it, and so they obviously have China within their sights. They're going to try and clobber China. I mean, there's absolutely no, whether it's financially, economically, and again militarily, because at the moment, China is militarily much weaker than the West. I mean, you see how they've turned on Russia, and Russia's much stronger militarily than China. But look what they've done to Russia. Imagine, how they're going to turn on China if Russia were to fail. I mean, that's the plan, and that's why, just going back to our discussion today, NATO is a very, very dangerous organization. I mean, as long as it continues in its existence, its rationale is unlimited expansion, there will be a catastrophe. Like, it cannot be avoided, as NATO continues.
Well, and unfortunately, they look at the most recent history the so-called global war on terror. And they've seen how they can exert power. I mean, it didn't do any good for anybody at the end of the day, except for a lot of people made money off of arms. But NATO grossly overestimates itself as well. Okay, and that makes it even more dangerous because ideology leads this organization. It's not geopolitical thinking,
Right.
and that's why it is such a toxic mix. And they will take when a hegemon sees its power diminishing, they will take greater risks to maintain it. Okay,
Right. Yeah.
and then you have this neo-colonial attitude of Burrell, like these are just Slavic people, these are Asian people.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't know how to do anything. Okay, they can make some trinkets, but you know, we have the experience. Okay, we committed genocide around the world. We know how to agree. We know we have the tools. We have the
no. I think so. I without question, they think of themselves as the masters of the universe, and the rest are inferior. And that makes, again, the issue of World War II particularly painful, because in World War II, you had the Slavs who did the heavy lifting. They pummeled Germany. And I think our friend Martin Jane, I think in one of our crosstalk discussions some time ago, you said, well, the Russians beat the Germans. They didn't just beat the Germans, they beat the crap out of the Germans. That's a sore point with the Germans. Now, the Germans have become very, peace-loving and so on since then, but they know that's a real sore point with them, that the Slavs, who they clearly think are vastly inferior to them, beat the crap out of them. And that ultimately, generation after generation grows up, and they want to do something about it. They want to rectify history, because that's a source of shame to them. And I think that's again World War II, an outcome of World War II that they had to live with, that the Slavs beat the crap out of the Übermensch with the Germans.
Yeah, but there was one soothing ointment, as it were, is that we make good things that they want. Well, the fly in the ointment, everybody, is, yeah, you can make great things with cheap energy from Slavs, okay? And now that leg has been cut underneath, okay? So, I mean, I can remember when they were making the conversion to the euro, and George and I remember in our own lifetime, Deutschmark nationalism, okay? I mean, all right, we got the crap beat out of us in the war, but we got the Deutschmark, and everybody likes the Deutschmark, okay? Right. And so, convincing them, to give up the Deutschmark, because that was their calling card. Okay, we don't make tanks anymore, and the world is thankful, but we have banks, okay? Right. And so, but it's all it's undergirded by having cheap energy and access to markets. Okay, right. You take those things away, you're just a middle power.
No, absolutely. And I think, Trump kind of, spotted the issue, which no one had talked about, which was, well, the euro was really very nice for the Germans, because, of course, the euro was crap. I mean, it was, diluted with all the other currencies. So now German products were selling cheaper on the world markets than they had been when, it was the Deutschmark. And of course he raised that issue. Germans weren't very happy that anyone should raise the issue. So I mean, yeah, you're undercutting us because you basically aligned with all these shitty currencies, Greeks.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I mean, yeah. I mean, the hatred the Greeks had for the Germans during the Second World War is only equal to what they have now. Okay. Yeah. And it's all because of the euro. Okay.
Yeah. That's right. And that's what the source of pride for the Germans. But it does mean that they look at it and they say they have to deal with this Russian problem, because not only still there that they won that war, and they basically you threw everything that you had at them, which is and they did. It was not just the Wehrmacht, but they had the resources of Europe that the Wehrmacht was able to deploy against them, and they failed, and then ultimately there is an attempt to overturn that outcome. And you're absolutely right. According to the current ideology, it's Russia that wants to turn the outcome. No. you know, Russia is very happy with that outcome. Russia, that's why we say Russia is a status quo power, because Russia thought, hey, the post-1945 world, that's not bad. You know, we're respected as a great power. You know, our interests are acknowledged. And, you know, the Western powers are forced to accept, you know, their own, you know, the restraints imposed by the United Nations. It's been the West that has been desperate, you know, ever since 1991 to get rid of the limitations that the United Nations imposes.
And that's why during, I don't know, people always say the height of the Cold War. There were many heights of the Cold War, I suppose. But the 1970s, a height, okay? That's why the Russians bought into the Helsinki process. Yeah. We get to codify the outcome of the Second World War. That's all. That is gold for them. That's what they've been wanted for decades. They had wanted that for decades, and they finally got it. And then when the Cold War comes to an end, the whole Helsinki, well, that was part of the Cold War. No, no. That's called European security architecture. And when the Cold War came to an end, NATO says, well, no, that's null and void right now. Well, you know, that's old, you know, that's a long time ago. They love to say that. That's a long time ago.
That's right.
But the Russians said, no, we're the successor state, and you signed that, and we want indivisibility of security like everybody else.
Exactly. And that's why, I mean, you're absolutely right when you said, when John McCain talked about these League of Democracies, and I guess Biden wants to do this as well. You know, we're talking about these democracies. So this NATO League of Democracies will replace in their idea, they will replace the United Nations. So when they come along with all these plans, well, I've got this great idea of let's reform the United Nations Security Council. They only have one agenda there. They want to basically push out Russian influence from there, you know, because that was part of the status quo. That was part of the agreements that ended World War II.
And you know, George, and it kept the peace.
It kept the peace. Yeah.
It kept the peace. That was the whole point.
Exactly.
That was the whole point of it. Let's keep the peace.
Exactly. It kept the peace. And precisely because the Western powers have tried to get rid of this post-1945 architecture, we don't have that anymore. We don't have that security that we had for decades, and nobody really thought that we'd get a world war. I mean, that was pretty much, conventional wisdom. There's not going to be another world war. We've got this deterrence. We've got nuclear powers. You know, they're not going to start anything crazy. Basically, NATO, this sort of instability, has shattered that. And it's part of the same thing. You know, they wanted to destroy a deterrence, and they want to destroy the stability of the United Nations.
Yes. So who's overturning the outcome of the Second World War? And it's very important. I just said it very shortly, and I think I said it today in our program, is that the Russians interpret the end of the Cold War radically different than the West. And that is, and what the West does, they use their interpretation of the end of the ending of the Cold War as their trump card, because basically what they're saying, they'll never say it openly, but this is what they think, and they think it very to their DNA. You lost, and that means we won.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly it. Unfortunately, you know, you had the people around Gorbachev, all those characters, you know, Yakovlev and these people. I think they had simply bought into that kind of Western thinking, you know, that somehow, hey, we're all on the same page, you know, we can all sort of sit down, thrash something out, you know, work out an arrangement whereby we can run the world together. I mean, you know, you think, how the hell can you be that naive? Just thinking that they're on your side, they're going to help you. Yeah, they're going to help you dismantle your system. Yeah. We'll help you move towards market capitalism. Yeah. We'll get rid of your, you know, one-party state. We're going to help you out there. Yeah, and then forget about you know, joining our security system. But that was big, because if Gorbachev had thought seriously about the issues that we've been talking about, he said, well, we're not going to give up any of our security arrangements unless you make corresponding concessions of your own. No, we don't withdraw from here unless you withdraw your forces. I mean, we're not just going to unilaterally give up everything that we've built up all these years.
You can bring in McDonald's and Burger King all you want. That's fine with us, okay? But the security agreements stay. And You want to keep your NATO? Fine. We don't need the Warsaw Pact, but we're going to keep our bases in Eastern Europe.
Exactly. Exactly.
And if they don't like it, too bad.
Exactly. What are you going to
do?
do?
Because you're going to keep your military bases in your alliance.
Right. Exactly. No, I think
but we still can be friends. We can go to the movies together. Okay. We can go out and date on the weekends, right. But we're not going to dismantle the security system. That is the biggest flaw of Gorbachev.
Okay? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And he could have said, well, we have to stick with these military arrangements. We're not going to tell you how you run your economies and everything, have your goulash, free market or all the rest. Bring in your Coca-Cola and all these wonderful Western firms, but the security arrangements stay because they're vital to our security. If NATO wants to, dissolve itself, we'll dissolve ourselves. But who the hell unilaterally dissolves his military alliance just like that? And then,
Well, as George never ceaselessly to remind us, and it's so germane. Russia's been invaded many, many times. Let me think, George. Most of the time from the West.
From the West, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Why? Wait. Nothing's really changed, okay?
No, exactly. Nothing, huge invasions over the past 200 years. And then, of course, even before that, with all the, the invasions from Turkey and the rest. And I mean, to give all that up, I mean, it just simply... it beggars belief. Nobody gives anything up unless somebody else is also willing to give something up. I mean, you have a kind of step-by-step process. Okay, well, we'll withdraw from here, and then you withdraw from there, and there was no reason for it because let's say Czechoslovakia says, no, well, you must leave our country immediately. So, okay, well, you can go on shouting till you're blue in the face. We're not going anywhere. What is Václav Havel going to do? I mean, what Mr. Havel, write a play? He's going to write a manifesto.
Well, I think it was Brezhnev said, we will be here forever, and forever is a long time.
Yeah. I will write an editorial, condemning you. I mean, okay, go ahead, write it, but we're not going anywhere. And now we're suffering the entirely predictable consequences.
Well, it's essentially what they demanded is that you have no national security interests. Only we do. Right. Okay. It was asked and it was done, a unilateral disarmament.
Yeah.
Everyone, you can have agreements. Look at the Cuban Missile Crisis. Right. Kennedy agreed to withdraw the missiles in Turkey, though it wasn't made public for a year.
It wasn't made public, yeah.
Okay.
But that's again, yeah. I've never understood why Khrushchev allowed Kennedy to make it seem as if this was a great victory for the United States. It was basically they both got something. The Soviets withdrew their missiles in Cuba. The Americans withdrew their missiles from Turkey. Why were the Americans allowed basically to keep that a secret? I don't get it. So therefore, the Americans went, "Whoa, we won. We faced down the Soviets."
Those devious Soviets, they kept their word, didn't they?
They kept their word, exactly, because Kennedy asked them to promise that you're not going to tell the world about that we're going to dismantle the missiles from Turkey. And the Soviets said, okay, we'll keep that a secret. I mean, why do they get to do that? I mean, I just find this just completely mystifying. And to this day, I mean, we talked about this some time ago, like Pat Buchanan, still talks about how, Kennedy faced down Khrushchev in Cuba. I mean,
no, it's like, and Ukraine unilaterally gave up its nukes, ridiculous myths to keep floating around.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, even John Mearsheimer says that.
Yeah. Mearsheimer is just bizarre. I mean, he's a very sensible fellow, but on this issue, he's completely off his rocker. I mean, he precisely says exactly that somehow, I was advising Ukraine not to give up its missiles. How can Ukraine not give up its missiles? I mean, they weren't under Ukraine's control. Ukraine would have to go to war to hold on to basically, they would have to take the missiles away from the Russians. I mean, that would mean war, and one in which no one would support Ukraine, because nobody wanted to create Ukraine as another nuclear power.
It's in line with Russia's unprovoked aggression. Okay, right. See, this is how these we've gone from decade to decade. All of these narratives that are completely Western generated, that are completely divorced from reality. Right. And that is and that is something that George and I have lamented, is that when it comes to narration, generating narratives, the Russians are very slow to react. Okay, right. They end up doing it, and they end up, I think, making a sensible case, but it's always reactive, always reactive.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, I think it is. They are reactive, and that's they would make a very strong case, but the case with the missiles. In the Cuban missiles, I mean, most of the world has no idea what happened.
Still.
And that it was a provocation. Khrushchev would not have put the missiles in Cuba if America hadn't deployed the missiles in Turkey in the first place. They had done this. Khrushchev responded to that. I mean, it's like, and then basically it was they both agreed to withdraw the missiles. That story is just barely known.
But George, Ukraine can choose its own security partners, but right. Cuba can't. Cuba can, but Ukraine can.
Yes, okay. That's right, exactly. Yeah,
I mean, the level of duplicity. It boggles the mind. Right. Okay, and you see these talking heads on cable TV, which fortunately is dying. They repeat these myths and these lies with the greatest of ease.
That's right. Ukraine, if Ukraine wants to be in NATO, then Ukraine should be in NATO. Okay, so, but that doesn't apply to Cuba. Cuba cannot join.
Or one of my favorite ones, because I was in actually an international hotel, and it was the only times in the last 20 years I've seen CNN. Russia's invaded Crimea with 25,000 troops. No, they didn't invade. They've been there since 1991. There was no invasion.
Right. Yeah. That's right.
Or the BBC showing a map. Gazprom. Mm-hmm. And it has a Moscow and it has London, and he's showing a map. Gazprom has this vast pipeline system from Moscow all the way to London, controlling. Freeze. Pause, everybody. No, the fact that they don't control those pipelines is the problem.
Right.
Completely reverse of what the situation is.
Yeah.
A complete falsehood.
Absolutely.
Okay. The problem is that once it left, the pipe entered Ukraine, Ukrainians were siphoning it off, and it was gas that was sold to Western Europe. Okay. Right. So Russia's being held, we're not stealing it, we're sending it through this third country. You got to talk to this third country. Yep. They're the ones that's stealing it from you.
That's right. Exactly. And of course, the Germans knew this, which is why they said, hey, it's a good idea. Why don't we build a pipeline under the sea, and then we can bypass Ukraine. It was a German idea. And then the Germans somehow said, oh, it was all the Russians. It was their idea. We really want to help Ukraine.
I'm glad you mentioned this, and I want to ask you a question. We have German intelligence, we have Dutch intelligence, we have Danish intelligence. I don't believe any of these stories, George. No. I think they're all made up. I think it's all generated. I think it's all a fiction, because the Seymour Hersh story spooked them so much because it had such detail and logic that they've invented this little cottage industry. So, it could have been rogue forces from Ukraine. Okay, yeah. Okay, and then we found the manifest for the boat. Poland. I don't believe any of them. I'm sorry.
I absolutely agree with you. It's like you instinctively feel this just rings false. This is an undertaking, a massive undertaking. Remember, they had to have done this at the time when Ukraine's got other things to be focused on. Yeah. And here they are. But apparently, this is a rogue operation, or maybe there was some Ukrainian intelligence involved. So they undertake this undetected, pull this off, and they've vanished into thin air. You know, they still can't even name who are the people. You know, can we identify them? You know, I mean, it's like, you know, Ivanov and Popov, you know, the ubiquitous Russians that they can always say, yeah, we got this guy, Sergei Ivanov and Ivan Popov, you know, they were the ones. So they don't have anyone. But now they keep just sort of adding sort of layers to this to make this a credible story. And you're absolutely right. It was the Seymour Hersh story that provoked this this flurry of fairy tales. And I think that was, remember when we even did, I think, a podcast on this, when Sergeant Schultz, almost days after the Seymour Hersh story, flew to Washington for basically a very secret meeting with Biden.
And it was less than a day without
exactly. That's right. It was boom. He just flew in, you know, and an hour later he kind of flew out again, which is, you know, you think, you mean you can't even have a telephone call? And then soon after that, we suddenly heard all these stories about, oh, it was the Ukrainian. And of course, it has to be a rogue operation, because they can't really say, yeah, Zelensky signed off on it, because then that will upset German public opinion and say, you know, what you mean? We're subsidizing this guy, I mean, who's you know, destroying our livelihood. So they had to say, oh, it's a rogue operation. Zelensky knew nothing about it. Zelensky's a good guy. You know, they just kept him in the dark.
It doesn't pass the smell test.
Exactly.
Okay?
That's it.
Because
exactly.
I mean, can anyone explain to us, well, why wasn't, I mean, this was the largest man-made natural disaster in history. Okay, really? I mean, talk about, you know, being green. This is the most anti-green act in history. Okay, Annalena Baerbock. And so, but, you know, there was, I guess, remember the first, I guess we'll never know.
Yep.
Okay. And then, you know, oh, I don't know, you know, this is a tough one, you know. And then Seymour Hersh's story comes out. And then all of a sudden, oh, well, there's a number of theories out there right now.
That's right,
well,
yeah.
Come on, there's causation going on here.
Absolutely. You're right. Because it looked like the official story will settle for that. I guess we'll never know. Could have been anyone. And that was, you know, the New York Times ran that story, one of their typical long, ponderous pieces. You know, who the hell knows? Could have been anyone. Washington Post, who the hell knows? Could have been anyone. And then Seymour Hersh writes it, and that you know, changed, and then they had to come up with a plausible theory. I mean, they could have tried to, you know, say maybe Iranians, but no one would have bought into that.
And the funny thing is that they can't even come up with a theory of the case that the Russians did it. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that's how embarrassing this thing is. Okay. That's how embarrassing it's like, well, we don't know who did it, but we're pretty sure the Russians didn't do it. Well, that's a very interesting train of thought, isn't it?
Yes. That's a very interesting one. But I guess even they applied a certain level of common sense. Well, you know, the Russians could just simply turn the tap off. I mean, you know, I mean, why blow up pipelines?
We turned it off and lost the key. So we're trying to get the key. We're looking for the key.
That's right. We turned it off and we lost the key. You know, sorry, but so they can't do that. But you know, it is a, you know, an interesting story, and it's a part of how they do this propaganda. I mean, it's like, you know, for instance, every time they go to other countries, you know, they go to South Africa and they say, you have to follow our foreign policy when it comes to sanctions against Russia. Now, how do you square that with the idea that no one else has any say in whether Ukraine joins NATO? I mean, you know, that is entirely a decision by Ukraine. Ukraine is sovereign. You know, only that. No one has any say on this. But apparently, you can go around lecturing other countries. Hey, you have to follow our foreign policy. You can't go around doing business with Russia.
The South Africans. I'm putting the words paraphrasing here, but I mean, I'm pretty sure they say to Blinken, "Well, we're gonna take as much sovereignty as you want to give Ukraine." Okay,
right. That's right.
Yes. All right, we're fair. Okay, we're even Steven here. Okay, we'll take as much sovereignty as you want to give them.
That's right. Exactly. And that's, you know, how the whole Western propaganda system is. You know, hey, well, what we do is is perfectly appropriate. But you know, it's absolutely intolerable what they are doing.
Intolerant. It's intolerable.
It's intolerable.
They love that word. It's intolerable. Only one country can have sovereignty, okay?
Right.
But we control that country's sovereignty, okay?
Right. Yes, it's
I mean,
exactly.
because Boris Johnson told us everything we need to know about Ukraine making sovereign choices, okay? As Putin showed the papers, the documents to the African leaders, okay?
That's right, exactly. Yeah, that's right. And then, yeah, that's right. Well, we get to decide it. Except of course when they decide to blow up pipelines. Then apparently we just have no idea what they're doing. I mean, that's it. Yes,
they're worried about that. They're definitely worried about it, okay? And more is going to come out. It's inevitable, okay? More is going to come out, and they're going to look even worse, okay?
What I like is, of course, Victoria Nuland, because Victoria Nuland, she's not even prepared to go along with these Western hypocrisies. I mean, she's just like she said, yeah, we've been planning this counteroffensive, but hey, I thought it's Ukraine who does this. We don't have any say in the matter. And then when she tells Ted Cruz, aren't you happy that it's just a bunch of corroding metal at the bottom of the sea? I mean, she's practically gloating about what has happened, just like with the biolabs. She didn't even bother lying about those biolabs. Great. I mean,
she's such a bizarre character. I mean, because she's obviously a psychopath, and for her, it was when the Western backed coup in February of 2014. She was definitely, considering her physique, I'm sure it was multiple bottles of champagne. And then it's like, what about Crimea? What? We didn't get Crimea. Right. What? Because right. It was the central plain of Ukraine, may be attractive to some people, but it's of no strategic value. Okay. Right. Crimea, well, that's a pearl. Okay. And so she comes back to power, and she will not cease and desist until she gets what she wants. Okay. Yeah. I'll give that to her. She's very open about what she wants.
That's right. That's right. And exactly. And she's the key player. She's always been the key player on Ukraine policy. And it's funny that in 2014, at the time of the coup, and again, she kind of blurted this out about how we spent $5 billion on Ukraine. So basically, yeah, we've been pouring in money for years and years, long before 2014, essentially to turn this into, an anti-Russia fortress. So again, she doesn't bother concealing what the Americans have been doing.
It's very interesting because George and I are children of the Cold War, and we both remember the publication Problems of Communism. Yes. and all the other, there was plenty of them out there. Okay. And it was a kind of a small group of us, what's going on in the Politburo in Poland.
Right. It's interesting. They were quite good magazines.
I love that stuff. I loved it. I really enjoyed it.
They were good magazines. Yeah.
They were good magazines. Yeah. And it was a lot of emigres. That's another topic. Okay. Right. But when the Cold War came to an end, all of it died. I mean, and quickly. And bat of an eye, it's gone. All that funding went on. Yeah. But at Harvard University, they started the Ukraine Studies program. Yes. The only thing that was the successor to all the Sovietology, criminology stuff that the CIA and the State Department, everybody was pouring into. Then they found, this was in the early 90s. Okay. Right. That's part of that $5 billion that George is talking about. Right. They already had their eye on it.
But that in fact even started earlier. I think
the Davis Institute, I think it's called.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but it started in the 1980s. I mean, the whole Holodomor industry that started at Harvard in the 1980s. When Robert Conquest wrote that book, The Harvest of Sorrow and so on, that got funding from this Ukrainian center at Harvard. So it was, that was a big project. Already. Creating the story of Ukraine. Ukraine as being, the victim of genocide at the hands of the Russians. Yeah, that's in the 80s. Again, this is still in the Cold War, and already they were moving that story.
Yep, the objectives never change. The bullshit lingo and narrative does. Okay, it doesn't matter. It's always going to the goal. All right, everyone, that's our about an hour and a half here. That's our wrap for the week, our usual Sunday wrap. Obviously, a lot of big things happening. Since we're getting all this kind of commentary about what's going to happen in Vilnius, George and I will cover that for you guys to make sure you know what's going on and what other people are saying. And other than that, well, this is Sunday. That means George and I will convene tomorrow, and his first live stream is on Tuesday.
So if you can survive, one more sunny day, then it's time for my live stream on Locals. Please join me at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Come with comments, criticisms, suggestions, and don't forget Little Buddy, because Little Buddy is saying, that $5 billion that Victoria Nuland handed out, very little of it ended up in the tip jar. And I think he has a point. Not all these billions. Point. Yeah, they never seem to end up in the tip jar. So we got to calm him down and explain to him the way the world works, but he's not prepared to understand these things. So if you have a few bob in your pocket, whip them out, dunk them in this tip jar, because he doesn't understand how National Endowment for Democracy and how these things work. You don't get any of that Ned money, buddy. So we're very grateful for all of your help and friendship and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve the technology, and above all, the more we can try and keep Buddy calm. Look, he's very agitated. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.